So welcome everybody to our October. I was trying to remember what the month was there. To our October monthly meeting. And so we have a pretty busy agenda. There we go. So so do you guys hear me well on the Teams? Art, do you hear me well?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay.
We're getting thumbs up.
Perfect.
We're getting thumbs up.
Okay, so the agenda, I've added a little thing there, Mike, that you hadn't seen. So we're going to talk about, there's a big battery project happening in the West End. We'll talk about that a bit. Then our friend Mike, who's remote today, will talk about legacy ice manufacturers and their market share. You'll be surprised to see that some manufacturers actually have pretty high market share in terms of EVs versus ICE cars, right? Then we'll talk about charging in condos. And one of the things we realized a couple of weeks ago, as we're doing stuff, Sam and I and a few others talking to condos, is that we really haven't explained to the rest of you what we're doing. So what I'll do is I'll go through a standard presentation we do with him, and I'll explain what we're doing and where we're doing it, okay, and what the goals are and all that, okay? Then I'll talk about the ultra low overnight rates. They start, we're supposed to officially start the 1st of November, but I think it's actually the 2nd of November. So those are coming soon, and I've got examples with bills, real numbers from my own bills that show you the difference in cost with the ultra low rates. Okay, so that should be interesting. Then we'll do the news like usual, and then the rest of the stuff is standard. So let's go to this here. So I was telling some people here earlier before we started the meeting that I've been spending the weekend reading a lot about batteries. So there's a BESS is battery electric storage system, right? And there's a project that's being proposed for Fitzroy Harbor. And some people have heard about this, and there's actually a couple of information sessions, one Wednesday and one Thursday, I believe. The one Wednesday is on site in Fitzroy Harbor. The one on Thursday is a virtual one. And so it's the people who are proposing this battery that are going to be there to talk to the public. Okay, but what's happened meantime is a couple of people reached out to me saying, hey, we got a problem here. We've got people who don't understand batteries, and there seems to be opposition to doing it, right? So if you know something about batteries, which most of you do, you know that there's very little risk deploying batteries. So essentially what I've done, this is an example of this West something online. It's one of the community newspapers in your end of town.
Yeah, so it's not Stittsville Central, but I think the Valley, the Ottawa.
No, it's West something.
West Carleton?
West, it might be, yeah.
West Carleton. It's the West Carleton, Fitzroy Harbor is in West Carleton.
Okay, so yeah, I'm pretty sure it's West Carleton online.
Yeah.
This letter here, and I won't go through all of it, came up. The first part of it actually explains why batteries are a great thing for us to adopt wind and solar. But then it goes on to ask a bunch of questions. Which type of batteries are going to be used? You know, or what's the risk of fire? What's the environmental impact of mining these batteries? All these questions we've had before many times, right? And other questions there. Anyways, bottom line is I've and this came to my attention today, but last week there were a few people who had similar questions pop up for the exact same project based on the announcement that was made that there would be this public information session. Okay, so what we're trying to do is we're trying to get ahead of the curve. We're trying to prevent misinformation from spreading. And we also want to provide information that will allow people to understand that it's not. But anyways, so this battery project, I'm not sure how big it is. I think it's around 200 megawatts or something. So it's a substantial project, and it's supposed to go on agricultural land in Fitzroy Harbor. There's issues there with, you know, it's agricultural land. Should we put it there? Things of that nature. But really, if you think about the batteries and what is in them, the risk of fire is very low. We expect it'll be LFP batteries. So those of you who've been following the batteries, you know that the ones that had the fire problem, minor risk of fire, but still a fire problem where the NMC chemistry, right? The old nickel, manganese, cobalt. The LFP one has much less issues. And we know they're gonna use the LFP first because I reached out to them and they told me they would. Second, it would make no sense for them to use NMC because it's more expensive than LFP. So it would make sense for them to use LFP and maybe even sodium ion, because the deployment's gonna happen in 2027, 2028. Okay, we're still a fair amount of time, from there. But anyways, bottom line is trying to get ahead of the issues and making sure that FUD doesn't get spread in the community. So we want to be able to see things that happen like this. So if you see anything, yes?
So the point of this is it's a, burn insulation or, energy wind, for example, lots of wind to the wind turbine so that I can be taken out later.
Exactly. So as we have more solar and wind, because they're intermittent, we need some storage to be able to, right?
There's a couple of dams on the Ottawa River, which are up near Fitzroy. So there's a lot of hydro, there's a fair bit of hydro coming out of those. So I could see them definitely, that being another source of
It could be for the hydro, but I think the main purpose at this point is we have surplus wind energy on a lot of days. And what we're doing in Ontario is we're just wasting the electricity. We're curtailing production. We're not producing, even though there's wind. So the idea would be to produce anyways and put the electricity in batteries. So that way we don't waste the energy. And also we could shave the peak, right? So you know that the peak, a lot of the peak is meant using gas powered plants, right?
Yeah,
So by having the battery instead, we burn less gas. Yes.
Raymond, just that, there's a huge solar array in just around the corner of Fitzroy Harbor. You probably can see it from the 417.
Yeah.
So I wonder if that's tied in somehow or not, getting a little bit of a.
It certainly might be. So without.
They would be on the same main.
But without spending too much time talking about all that stuff, all of these sources of energy, we need to manage them. And given that solar and wind are intermittent, we need batteries to make up the difference, right? So that's what they want to do here. Like I say here, it's critical to the transition to clean energy. So if you hear anything about something like that, something like this was a letter to the editor. If you see anything else like that, can you please notify me? And there's a group of people that are working on a standardized response for these things. So we're going to try to nip it in the bud before FUD starts spreading. So one of the reasons we're doing this is because there's been proposals for windmills in the area. And there's lots of opposition, lots of disinformation about windmills. Apparently they affect groundwater. They contaminate groundwater somehow. I don't know how that could possibly happen, but there's a lot of FUD being spread by people who have either don't want to see them because they're NIMBY, right? Or their other interests, the natural gas interests in particular, that want to keep their market and don't want us to go to clean energy. Okay. So I thought that would be shorter, but anyways, that's any questions on that? No? Okay, so the next priority is Mike. So Mike, do you want to go ahead?
Yep. Okay. I assume everyone can hear me all right. I
Yep,
have a
loud
bit
and
of a
clear.
cold. So, okay. So we'll start with the next slide. I'll be talking about legacy ICE and the percents of sales that are currently EV for each brand that are reporting. So these are all Q3 2023 numbers for the US. So there's no Canadians breakout or anything like that. And we'll start with Ford, which is the largest EV non-pure EV company. So the largest of legacy brands selling EVs. With a total of 20,962 EVs delivered in 2023 in the third quarter. So that's not the full year, that's just the third quarter. Leading the pack is the Mach-E and of course the F-150 Lightning. There have been a lot of stories and hay made about how Lightnings are sitting around on the lots in the US, but that is true for all $100,000 pickup trucks, not just the electric ones. So if you hear those kind of stories, put it into context. Turns out that people, when the interest rates are going up, don't have as much money to burn on a truck, and so Rams are sitting around as well. Basically, any expensive vehicles are all sitting on the lots. And so for their market share of what they sell, it's only 4% of what they sell are EVs. So that means 96% are gas vehicles still.
Yeah,
If we
but
go to the
that's-
next,
Yeah, so that's not bad for a company that was selling
Yeah.
nothing electric until a couple of years ago, right?
that's true. And they only have 3 models out right now, right? So that's not bad for 4% of their sales being just 3 models. GM is the next one in the list. The Bolt EV and EUV, they sort of lump together. And those, they sold, almost 16,000 of those last quarter, which is not bad. That's a 3-month period, right? They sold 16,000 bolts, which is pretty good. And then you can see the rest of the list there, Lyric, Hummer, BrightDrop. So Chevy has, these are pure EV, not battery. So these are just like not hybrids, just battery electric vehicles. Right, so Chevy or GM sold 20,000 units for the 3 months ending September. That works out to about 3% of their vehicles sold are electric. So not bad, but a little worse than Ford, especially considering they have so many vehicles sort of available. Although the Blazer, as you can see, sold like 19 and Silverado sold 18. So those are just ramping up now.
Yeah, they
so that
just started.
They
Yeah,
just
sorry,
started
they-
deliveries, so that share should start climbing for Q4. We'll see what happens next quarter.
Yeah, and actually,
next-
sorry, Mike, actually, I'm supposed to have a Blazer for a weekend soon. And
Mhm.
when I have it, I'll let people know. So if you want to come and see it, you'll be able to see it. Okay?
Yeah, and they're only
So-
showing 35 BrightDrops for the last quarter. But I know that production started around September in earnest, so that number will be a lot bigger for the Q4 total, like
Yep.
in the hundreds at least. All right, next slide. So we've got my favorite brand, Hyundai Kia. Well, actually, it's just Hyundai. Kia didn't report, and neither did Genesis. They report separately, and we don't have numbers for them yet. So their Q3 deliveries total was just shy of 17,000, and that's not including the Kona EV, which is still selling. For whatever reason, they did not disclose the number of Konas they sold in the US. I suspect the sales of Kona aren't doing great in the US because it's a small vehicle. Whereas in Canada, I think they tend to sell a lot more Konas in Canada than they would in the US. But either way, the Ioniq 5 is leading the pack as expected. Ioniq 6 is not far behind, actually surprisingly close, considering that it was only just recently released to the market as well. And so 8% of all the vehicles that Hyundai sells in North America, or in the US, I should say, are electric. So that's pretty good. And that doesn't even include the Kona. So that number could actually be a bit higher.
Yeah, one thing to note with Hyundai is the vehicles they sell right now, none of them are eligible for the
Yeah, none of them get the US
$7,500.
rebate. Yeah, so
Yeah.
that actually holds them
So-
back a little bit as well.
And
But
actually-
their factory, in the news, you'll see something about their factory, so we'll get to that.
Yeah, so a lot of people are talking about sales being soft of EVs, right? So if I'm living in the US and I'm looking at buying an EV today, I'd be stupid to buy it now and not wait until January. Because in January, I think it's January anyways, they're changing it from a tax credit.
Yes,
So
to
for
a
tax-
actual rebate.
Yes,
That's
just
a
like we have in
sale, yeah.
Canada, right? So for a lot of people, well, first they're gonna get the money right away. And they're likely to get more money because it's not a tax credit, right? It's
Yeah.
a subsidy, right?
So there's some dynamics happening in the US that are changing. I see a comment in the chat, just a second, I'll address that. Yes, the BrightDrop is at the Ingersoll factory. It was on hiatus for a little bit, but it's back online and up and running now. So they had a pause, but all right, anyway. BMW, they are selling, they didn't disclose Mini, which I guess they see as a separate brand. They didn't have to disclose it under BMW, but they sold 13,000. So we're all less than 20,000 here for everyone else, basically. i4, i7 were lumped together, and then the iX with the beaver teeth. Mercifully did not sell that many. They only sold 5,000. But as a share of vehicles they sell in the US, 16% is a respectable percentage of vehicle sales for the company. And that'll only go up as they introduce more and more EV models to the market. So not bad. Next slide, please. Volkswagen has just the one vehicle in North America, the ID4, and they sold 10,000 of them, almost 11,000 last quarter. So 3 months, they sold 11,000. And that works out to 12% So just one EV in Volkswagen's lineups equals 12% of their wholesale for North America, which imagine what happens if they were to bring the ID3 and the Buzz and stuff, right?
Well, the buzz is gonna come here, but not, it's gonna take a bit more time,
It'll
right?
take a bit more time. All right, so Volvo is going all electric by 2035 anyway. So this is more of a progress update on that goal. They didn't break down the individual models. They have 3 or 4 on the market now. They sold 9,205, but it's also 15% of what they sell. Volvo tends to be a high-end brand in North America. So as they displace more and more of their gas car lineup with EVs, that number will continue to rise, but it's already pretty respectable for what they do. They don't do a lot of sales here. All right, next slide. Audi is sort of in rank of total numbers sold kind of thing. They didn't break down their models. They're all named e-tron for reasons that I don't understand. But 13% of their sales are electric now, which ain't bad. And that totals 7,500 vehicles. So that's, that's something. And I forget how many they have on the market. It's 3 or 4. Now, of course, Tesla's 100% electric, right, as we all know. But just to put this into a bit of context, so everyone else was selling 20 or less thousand every 3 months. Tesla sold 435,000 electric vehicles. So, it's like, excuse me. So like not even close, right? Like, and the Model 3 and the Y made up most of that. They're almost
So-
500,000. So yeah.
So these are global numbers, right?
These
They're
are
not-
global numbers.
Yeah.
That's true. I couldn't get the North America breakdown, unfortunately. But I mean, just to put this into perspective, like it's a lot of cars, and a significant chunk of those cars are being sold here in North America, right? So yeah. And then the next one should be Rivian, which is exclusively to the US. I don't think they've started even delivering in Canada yet. And they made 15,000. So they're sort of in line with GM and everyone else as far as production of EVs go. But they have just the 2.
Yeah, given that they're a new brand, right? It's still not so bad, and they're also building the vans for Amazon, right?
That's right. Yeah. So they do have the Amazon contract, and that is in this number. So there's fewer R1Ts and even fewer R1Ss that are part of this 15,000. But keep in mind that's only 3 months worth of sales. That's 5,000 a month. Yeah, they are a startup, right? So to have that volume at this point is pretty respectable for such a small company. Right, puts them in line with like GM. So, and I think that's it for me.
Yeah, so thanks, Mike. You don't have Stellantis in there. I think it's for an obvious reason, right? They have nothing in market,
Yep.
right?
They don't sell any EVs in North America.
Yeah, and the market share is 7%, I think, in the third quarter, or is it 10 in the US? Between 7 and 10 in US, right?
Yeah, it's approaching 10%. I'm not exactly, I didn't check that.
So you see
think
some are above and some are below, yeah?
Yeah, a couple of questions in the chat here too.
Yeah, so Mike, we saw this week GM, Ford, and the other one say that selling EVs was hard. And we saw, they had 4% and 3% respectively. Is this why these numbers came out? Everyone else was, 10, 15, 100%.
I think part of it, I mean, these are just their quarterly earnings announcements, so that's a pretty standard reporting thing. I think those 3 companies in particular are having trouble because all of their EVs are upmarket, and that is the segment of the auto market that's just having a lot of trouble, right? Nobody wants $100,000 cars right now. Everyone would kill. The Bolt is the best-selling EV from GM, and that's because in the US you can get one for as low as $20,000 US, right? And of course that's the one that they're killing. So I mean, killing until further notice. And they're replacing it with a car that starts around 50 apparently now. So they keep raising the price floor, and people just can't afford expensive trucks anymore, basically. So I think that's part of the issue. I don't think it's an overall EV thing. As Hyundai, shows, like with the Ioniq 5, there's still backlogs on those, and the 6 is the same. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, so we have another question here, Steve.
Yeah, Mike, it's Steve here. BYD, I saw you had the worldwide sales for Tesla. I was just wondering if you have the same sort of numbers for BYD. And do you see BYD moving into the North American
Yes.
market?
I did come across them, and I didn't put them in here because they don't sell here in the US or in Canada. They are in Mexico, but globally they are sort of on par with Tesla. They're selling, you know, almost 500,000 a year, or a quarter, I mean. I think they were like 300,000, like the high 300s, from what I remember. But they're quickly approaching Tesla numbers, but just not here in Canada or the US.
Do you see them coming into the North American market?
Oh, absolutely. They absolutely have designs to come here, and they're starting with Mexico. But it won't be long before they arrive. And NIO is the same thing. NIO wants to come to North America as well, although they're a bit more upmarket as well.
There's two questions on one, Gary and then Mitchell.
So Terry, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, I was just in Vancouver last week. The Rivian has an office there, a showroom, and they also are on the streets in Vancouver and Victoria. I saw several of them.
Cool. So yeah, I guess deliveries have started, but I mean, trickling in for now.
Cool. Mitchell?
Yeah, I was gonna say about the Rivian. My dad is currently on a trip to Halifax, and he saw a Rivian when he was charging, I think, around Chicoutimi, maybe.
Were they American plates though?
I think it was a Quebec plate.
Oh, right on.
I'm still trying to get confirmation from him on like Quebec versus somewhere in like New York, but it looked like it was doing, like it was hauling 2 dirt bikes that had seen pretty good use. So I would imagine that's somebody who lives in Quebec, but I'm not totally sure.
Nice. All right. Well, there you go.
Any other questions, comments before we go to the next? No? Okay, thanks, Mike. So, so the next part is charging in condos. Like I was saying earlier, what we want to do, actually, let me go here. So what we want to do is we want to explain to the rest of you who aren't involved directly in dealing with the project that Sam and I are mostly working on. We want to explain to you what we're doing for a couple of reasons. So, you know, we want you guys to know what we're doing. But also, we, if you know some condos that are looking for us to go and assess their property for charging, we'd be happy to entertain it, right? So we've got a couple of condos signed up yet, but we're going to sign up to 10. So if you have some people who live in a condo and they, you know, they're complaining they can't charge, well, send them to us and we'll be happy to work with them. They have to be part of the Better Buildings program at the City of Ottawa. There's a lot of advantages to be part of that. So what they do is they help properties with energy efficiency measures, right? So so there's some other benefits from being part of that program. So I want to show you the presentation. I don't want to deliver it, okay? Not the same thing. Again, and we'll go into the standard recommendations, and actually I'll show you an example that I've obfuscated. Someone will recognize it, but an example from one of the condos we did, okay? So again, it's a pilot project. We're going to do 10 properties. We're also are going to do up to 5 test drive events as part of this. Now, we're probably going to do that only in April next year because, as you know, as time advances, it's becoming difficult or dangerous to do test drives as the weather gets worse. But the goal is for people who live in the condo building to have access to charging, because we know that having access to charging at home is a significant barrier to a lot of people, right? So we want to figure out what can they do short term, but also we want to talk about what can they do long term. And I want them to understand the ZVIP program, which I'll talk about a bit further. But the ZVIP program is NRCan that provides money to help with installing chargers. So this is what the presentation looks like, right? So these are the topics you go through. We talk about EVCO. Why do we talk about EVCO? We want people to understand why we're there. Okay, we want them to understand that we're not there to sell them chargers. We're not there to sell them cars. We're there to help them figure out how to get charging in place, right? So that's the purpose of that. Then we explain what the program is, right? We want to unblock EV charging in multi-residential buildings, and it's done at no cost to the property. The city of Ottawa is providing a bit of money to help us deliver this program. We're talking small amounts of money, but it's enough to compensate Sam for one thing, because it's not fair that since he's the only electrician in EVCO that he had to do all the work, right? So this will allow him to do the work and deliver quality recommendations and not forego any wages. So if you know Sam, you know that he's very busy. So if he's doing one of these things, he's not doing something else. Okay. So we talk about the types of. You may have seen this in other presentations. Talk about the different types of EVs, and the only ones we're particularly interested in are things that you could plug, right? And then we talk about the EV adoption projections we have. Why do we talk about this? We want people to understand that there's a huge wave of EVs coming, okay? And you can see that in the graph on the left for those who are on the meeting. You see that the increase, this is a global market share, so we're at 14% global market share. Okay, so 14%, that includes all markets, right? Includes India, which doesn't have many EVs, includes South America that doesn't have that many EVs, and other places where EVs aren't, there's not much penetration. The number is probably skewed mostly by China, because China is somewhere around 30% right now, okay? And they have large numbers of cars. So, and if you look at, just don't want to get into too much details, but the chart on the right-hand side, what that is, it's the adoption curve for many countries. And what they've done here is they've taken 10% and put them all, so the 10% is at the same place on the chart, okay? So it gives you an idea that, every country essentially follows a very, very well-defined S-curve, right? So we know that for Canada, the S-curve, the adoption curve will be the same, right? We've talked about adoption curves before. I won't get too much into that. So here, these are the projections that we did. So one of the things I'm trying to convey to them is, look, in 2017, we projected this, and look, we're right here. So if we're telling you that in 2030, we'll be at 70%, I think is what it says there, about 70%. We're not just pulling a number out of the air, right? It's based on projections we've done that have panned out quite well up to now, okay? And also the RMI, the Rocky Mountain Institute. This is global market share forecast we see on the right-hand side here. And if you look at what we're forecasting for Canada, it falls pretty well in the middle of these, the two curves there between fast and faster, okay? So the idea is to give people evidence that this is happening, and it's happening fast, right? So then a bit more, well, here, the idea is to talk about some of the traditional forecasting firms that aren't forecasting really well. I could go into lots of details about why that is the case, but the point is a lot of people are forecasting small numbers, but the reality is turning out to be different, right? So why is this important for the condos, right? It's important because by 2030, and I have to do the exact math for this to double check that, but about 30% of the fleet, okay? 30% of the fleet in 2030 will be electric. Okay, so if you have a garage in a condo that's got 300 spots, there'll probably be about 90 of those that will be electric. And actually, since people in condos tend to be wealthier than people who than people in general, there's likely to be even more. Question?
Did you say you're projecting 70% by 2030?
That's the market share of new vehicles.
Oh, sales.
This is the fleet. Okay. So right now, the market share in Canada is about 10%, but the fleet is only about 2%, right? It takes a while for, right? And then by 2040, we expect that over 90% of the fleet will be electrified. So a few messages there. It's not happening next year. Okay, so you have a bit of time. You don't have to rush and panic, and right? But this is coming. Get ready, right? And obviously, like I said before, charging at home is the easiest option, the most convenient option, right? So what we would like to see eventually, what I think anyways is going to happen, is those of you who remember block heaters in the past, right? So we expect that charging stations or some ability to charge will become as ubiquitous as block heater plugs were in the past. It just makes sense. It's the cheapest way, most convenient way to do charging, right? So then we talk about the level 1 and 2 charging. Reason for that is to explain that there's one plug, right? So you guys know that NACS is probably the future, right? But there'll be an adapter. It's really not an issue. The point is every car in North America uses the same plug, right? So you don't have to worry about that if you're planning for charging. The other point here is that you could use 120 volt charging. You don't have to use 240, okay? Here, charging times, the point I'm really trying to hammer here is that for level 1, if you commute the average Canadian commute, which is 42 kilometers a day, you have plenty of time overnight to recharge, okay? So we're not by any way saying that level 1 is desirable, okay, long term. What we're saying is if you have the ability to use 120 charging today, well, you should be doing that. And then it gives you a bit more time to go and do something else, right? Do the level 2 deployment. Level 2, the reason I put the 1 hour there is that it's part of illustrating that it doesn't take that long to charge one individual car. So that means that for one particular circuit or the capacity of a circuit, we could be charging probably 12 cars overnight if you want to, okay? Because we'll charge them one at a time. Yeah.
Alan has a question.
Sure, Alan, your question?
Yeah, so I'm just wondering how many electric car models will condition batteries on level 1? Because mine won't. It's really important in
In
winter.
condos, it's mainly inside parking, so the battery conditioning is.
Yeah, you're talking about heating the battery in the winter, you mean, right? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, winter time is important, but also summertime for cooling. But, you know, a lot of the condos that are around here, you know, they're open to open air. They're not fully underground. So, yeah, it's something to be considered as you're doing your presentation.
Yeah, so two answers to that I would give people if they would ask me that question. One answer is we know that Daryl's been running EVs for like 30 years. What's his last name again? I'm trying to remember. McMahon, Daryl McMahon. So he's been driving electric for something like 30 years. He's had some oddball electric cars over the year and all that. He's never used anything but 120. Okay, and he's got a carport. He doesn't have a garage. Okay, so
those cars, I mean, the conversions that he's done and the conversion that I'm driving, I mean, we have a separate 120 volt circuit for a heater in that battery box in order to do that. And most modern electrics don't heat their batteries on 120.
So he also has a Ford Focus electric, right? And I'm not sure. I thought that his son had the Ford Focus and he had another one, right? And I'm not too sure which one it is.
Maybe to comment on that. When we do the presentation and we recommend level 1 charging, it's because it's interior and you already have 120 available.
Or there's no other reasonable short-term option. So the other case that I talk about is Lawrence, right? So Lawrence Williams, which you guys probably many of you know. He's not allowed to do it right now, so we're trying to fix that. But he was using a Buller to charge his Tesla 12 months a year, right? Winter, summer, no problem. So in the winter, he got very little charge when it was really cold, okay? Because probably all the energy went to heating the battery, right? But he was able to make do with just 120 without any real issues, right? So
That's impressive. I didn't know that. Thanks.
Yeah, so we are by no means encouraging people to stay with 120. The point is to try to figure out how can we get the condo to accept that people could charge to start the ball rolling, right? Okay, so if you have one EV that's charging, then you'll probably get another one and then another one, and eventually you'll have a lot of them, right? So it's really to unblock the situation that we're talking about 120, okay? So then we talk about, again, these are slides you've probably seen before. If you're doing dedicated circuits for every one of your charging stations, you're very likely to not have enough grid capacity to do this, okay? do the calculations, the ones that we've seen, there's no way you could charge every car at the same time, okay? So, so it's very unlikely that you could make this happen. However, we have systems that manage charging. And because they manage charging and they charge one car at a time, you need a lot less capacity. So what we're finding is, the ones we ran the numbers for, there's a few of them. We don't have the numbers for you guys yet, but I'm sure actually if we ran them, we would find that you'd have enough capacity to charge every car over a period of time, right? So what you would do is you manage the charging and time slice the charging between cars. And then you have enough time overnight to charge every car in there using level 2, okay? So it avoids upgrading the connection to the grid. So for those who've, Sam could probably tell us, I don't know what the numbers are, but it's very expensive to upgrade your connection to the grid. And Hydro Ottawa, when there's a built up area, they're not planning for people to add more stuff, right? So so it's not an easy situation, and it's expensive anyway. So you want to avoid that. You don't need to do that in most cases. So you want to avoid it. One of the things that people don't often realize is that buildings that are built, say between the 70s and the early 20s, early 2000s, they were built prior to LED lights, right? And they were built when their fridges, I remember when I was a kid, when the fridge would go on, the lights would dim in the house, right? Because the fridges were very inefficient back then, right? But fridges, Mike could tell you that when he was powering fridges with his car during the Dura show, the fridges that he was powering took 100 to 200 watt. That's it. It's very small compared to what we had before. So when you take that and you take the whole building, right? There's a lot of electricity that the system was designed to deliver that you don't need anymore. Okay, so that excess capacity should be you should be able to reassign it to charging. Okay, so that's what we're trying to. And then we talk about future proofing. So here I explained that the peaks during the day, and a vehicle to grid is likely to be a thing within a very short time, right? So we're expecting within 5 years at the most that we're going to start seeing some vehicle to grid being implemented. Right now, most cars don't support it. Most charging stations don't support it. However, like I say here, California has mandated that every car sold in California has to support V2G by, I think it's 2026 or 27. I can't remember the year, but it's a few years out. So this will become a lot more common, right? And there's a whole bunch of reasons why you want to support V2G. But to be able to support V2G, you have to have wiring set up in a certain way. You need to plan that in advance to be able to support it, right? So that's what we're telling them there. So plan in advance. Also postpone buying charging stations, because the charging stations available today, there are very few of them that support V2G. So if you buy a charging station for today, there's nobody using it for 5 years. Then maybe in 5 years you'll want to replace it with one that supports V2G. So you've bought that thing for nothing, right? So the idea is to push off any expense you don't need to do now to reduce the cost, right? Make it easier for the condo to deploy charging. Okay. Then we talk about the ZVIP program. So it's changed over the years, but the last incarnations we've had, you can have up to 20 charging stations supported in one project, and up to $5,000 per connector. Now, if you look at the average price we've seen for deploying 100% of the spots we're charging, you're talking somewhere between $3,500 to $4,500, more or less. Okay, but those are the order of magnitude of the prices, right? So here you have to pony up 50%. So if you think about 50% of 4,500, it's a lot less than 5,000, right? So what we recommend to condos is structure the project, the initial project, in a way that you could go and get as much of this $100,000 as possible. Okay.
Mitchell has a question.
Mitchell?
The numbers on the ZVIP thing, you can apply for as much funding as you want. That up to 50% of total project costs is only if you're going through a delivery agent. And so if condos have more than 20 chargers they want to put in, they just have to apply on their own, and they can ask for how much they ever want for that project.
Okay, let's connect that after that because I want to correct that, okay? Because I don't want to be giving the wrong information, right? This is my understanding of what the program was like, but
It was
let's
mine
connect. Okay?
It was my understanding too.
So if there's a way to get more money, then you'll see why this is important when we get to the last slide. So the standard recommendations we have, again, we recommend that they start with 120, whatever is available today. And they could charge to compensate for the electricity, they could charge a small fee, right? And maybe that fee could be put aside to have a bit of reserves to build the charging infrastructure that you want to build eventually, right? So, and also make sure to mention that electricity is very cheap, right? $2 per 100 kilometers is the rule of thumb we use. Because a lot of people have no idea. They think it's costing hundreds of dollars a month for electricity, but it's not, right? So then they should plan to deploy a level 2 and set up their project to leverage as much of the ZVIP money as possible. Okay. Some of these projects get fairly expensive, so you'll want to try to get as much of the free funding as possible. The other thing is you want to wait, like I said before, as long as possible to do things you don't have to do today. Okay, because I say everything here. Sam will contradict me on that, but labor will probably go up. But things like wiring and all that kind of stuff and charging stations, they should come down in price over time. So why buy something if you have to pay more today when you could buy it later and pay less, right?
The chargers will come down in prices, but right now the tendency, the material and cost of living is going up. So it's.
So copper is a commodity, right? And the copper price is very low.
But not just copper, like all the materials, PVC, everything. So I think it's starting to flatten there after the hike, but I definitely, I can see the chargers coming down in prices, 100%, but for infrastructure, I wouldn't bank on that.
The point is, don't spend money you don't need to spend today because it's not necessarily going to save you anything, right? No.
Raymond, can I come in on a point or a question I had on a Facebook group? Someone had asked about a chart using an extension cord. And of course, someone had said, oh, no, you're not allowed to charge EVs on an extension cord. And what I said was, get a professional electrician's opinion on this one. But what I'm aware of is the problem is if you go to Canadian Tire, most of the extension cords you buy are way too low gauge. You have to go to a much higher gauge if you're going to want to be charging an EV on an extension cord. Was I giving bad advice? What?
The extension cord should be as short as possible
And
the biggest gauge you could get.
Yeah, if you do require an extension cord, it's not recommended because you're creating a point. Well, number one, if your plug is used and the blades aren't touching well, it's going to be arcing and heating at that point. If you do use a gauge, your wires at least a gauge at 14 gauge. So if you go lower than that, well, because they do sell cheap extension cords that are very, very thin. If you go lower than that, then it's going to overheat. It's going to trip your breaker or cause fire. So yeah, definitely avoid extension cords. But the thicker the gauge, the better it is. But it's going to cost you an arm and a leg. And the shorter the extension
So
cord.
this one? No.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
It's powering a computer.
Yes, but to charge a car, absolutely not, right?
Make sure it's grounded too. And
Yeah, I'm sure many of you have seen some pictures where you see that it's in the winter and all the snow is melted around the extension cord, right? That's not a good thing.
and make sure there's a GFI somewhere. Actually, most car chargers have.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of things you should do for safety. Okay, so let's.
Terry has a question.
Terry?
Yes, when I first got my car, I was a little distance from my charger, and I bought a 1772 extension cord, which is actually it's not really an extension cord. It's got a 1772 for my car on one end and a 1772 socket on the other end. It's heavier gauge than the actual charger, and it gives me an extra, I think, 20 feet. And so it's a heavy cable. I carry it in my car if I'm ever iced out of a charging point, I can always use that to get past the ice car. And like I say, it's a heavier gauge, so it's designed to not be a fail point.
Yeah, so
And
that, yeah, I don't think there's any issues there. Again, you said 20 feet, right? It's not that long. A lot of extension cords are 100 feet or whatever. So that should work well, right?
Yeah. Also, when you coil the extension cord, you're creating induction, so.
Yeah, so when you coil the extension cord, you could be creating induction, so, and there's lots of things.
That's only when it's deployed. I mean, when it's in your car, it's not a problem.
No,
No, but if you have 100 feet extension, you need 10 feet and the rest is coiled up nice and tight.
Yeah,
Well,
not good. Yes.
it's not good. It's not good. It's for, the shortest you can, the biggest gauge you can, those are the recommendations, right? Some manufacturers actually say that you should not use extension cords, right? So,
That's basically like a CYA thing though. Like,
Yes.
it's not really because it's inherently dangerous.
yes,
because it can regulate the size
The
of it.
other thing is, J7872 extension cords can be dangerous too because it's not actually officially supported in the standard, so there's no way for the car to know what the gauge of the extension cord is. Like, if you have an extension cord that's good for 30 amps and you plug it into a 50 amp charger, like, you're gonna throw 50 amps through it. The car's not able to tell that there's an extension cord in the middle because it's just passing all the communication bits through.
okay,
So if you're gonna buy a G7072 extension cord, just get one that's thick enough to take the maximum charging speed of your car. And then if you use it on a different car, like, be careful.
yeah. So bottom line is, make sure you know what you're doing, right? And buy the biggest gauge you can. So with those cables, there may be different gauges. I've got a charger in my garage that does 80 amp. So some of those cables probably don't support 80 amp, right? So good point. Okay, so then as we go through the presentation, we talk about advantages of having charging. One of them is convenience for owners, which we already mentioned. The other one is resale value increase. We don't have numbers for how much the resale value will increase, but we have anecdotal evidence that it's going to make a difference. And if you look at the numbers I talked about before, in 5 years, if you cannot offer charging in your condo, you're going to have trouble selling the units in the condo, right? It's unfortunate reality, right? So becoming proactive. I'll skip to some of these things a bit.
They're
So
repeating themselves a lot.
yeah, they repeat themselves a bit, yeah. So this is one of the combos we looked at, and we don't know how many parking stalls there are. There's two plug-in vehicles, including one of the owners is here. So he's got a Nero, 2023 Nero. So the bottom line here is we want to do a survey to get an indication of what kind of demand there is, short term and a bit longer term, to be able to guide their boards in terms of what, how fast you should be doing things, and actually it's going to help them with the financials as we get there in a few slides. So you need to do a plan, right? So these are recommendations specific for your, it's Don, right?
Yeah.
Okay, for Don's condo. So I removed the address there, but anyway, so in their case, so I'll take a step back. So if you have reserves, okay, so if you have reserve funds in a condo, every condo needs to have reserve funds, but you can't use the reserve funds for just anything, okay? So in this particular case here, the useful life of the electrical equipment is 25 to 40 years, okay? And we saw by looking at the tags that they haven't been changed in a while. They're probably at end of life. We're not sure, would have to be checked. But they're likely either at end of life or going to be at end of life soon, okay? That means you need to take reserves to fix that, right? So maybe it's an opportunity to not build the same thing, but build it in a way that'll be easier and cheaper for you to do the charging, okay? So that's the recommendation specific to them. Okay. Yeah, reserve funds, yeah, more or less same thing. Okay, cool. So this is another condo, not yours. To give you an idea what we've done here is we have the plan, And we have a preliminary diagram to show what things would look like, right? So the green things, those are the ones that look like more or less sinks there. Those are transformers that are actually taking 600 volt current
What are,
and stepping it down to 208, right?
what are the big red X's?
I'll talk about that after. So I put those on. Okay. There's a method to my methods. So, so what would happen is you would go from those transformers to the pinkish, purplish, things. Those would be, junction boxes. And then from there, you're going to the individual charging stations. That's the yellow ones that you see there. The whole floor isn't done yet, right? So it's just to illustrate some of the examples. And you can see that in the middle here, for those who are on the thing, you probably don't see it. But if you look on the left-hand side, there's two green squares there that are separate. Those represent two transformers. So one of the ideas here is short term, you might want to put just one transformer there and then put the second transformer when we need it, right? When we have enough demand for charging to do that. So in this building here, because it's stretched out, there would be transformers at the other end. So you see the green boxes on the right-hand side. So the X's, there are X's. So when you're doing a survey of who wants to do charging short term, you're not going to get, as it says here, it won't be localized. You won't have everybody on the first floor all together that want to participate initially, right? You're going to have them spread all over the place, right? So you may have one at one X at one end and another X at the other end. And you have to figure out how to do that without deploying everything. But you don't want to deploy the conduits that are purple here. You want to deploy them the size you'll need at the end, right? You don't want to deploy a smaller conduit that you'll have to change after, okay? So lots of things to consider when you're figuring out what you're going to do, okay? This one here, specific to this condo, they have some outdoor parking. Most of the parking is indoor, but they have outdoor parking and they have a bit of capacity in their existing electrical infrastructure to accommodate some charging. So one of the things we propose that they could do is the where you see in the yellow there, those are the parking spaces that are assigned spots. The other ones are visitors. So we're saying that they could consider putting charging stations in those locations, right? As a first step. But for those of you who've been in condos before and dealt with that, changing parking spots is an issue, right? So people have almost a religious attachment to their parking spot, especially if it's right beside the elevator, right? So it's not necessarily easy to do that. So for this particular thing here, rough estimate, $70,000 for 20 charging stations, okay? So that's what we're looking at in terms of costs, right? So about $3,500 per charging station, which is lower than what it would take on average to do the whole building. It's lower because we're taking advantage of stuff that's already there. We don't have to put so much stuff, yes.
So the people that accepted that would get a parking spot in that yellow area, that would be their parking spot, which would be outdoor parking, whereas they used to have indoor, which would not increase the value of their bundle.
Well, it all depends how you want to do it, right? But you may do some temporary swaps or something, I don't know, right?
Yeah, it's temporary.
Maybe they get both.
It would probably
Both
be
is
cheaper
what-
to do it would be cheaper to do it inside because it's closer to the main electrical room.
Okay.
But it's the changing and swapping of parking spots would be difficult. But someone that really needs charging and doesn't care changing would be easier to say someone outside, hey, we got a parking spot inside if you don't mind. You know, if there, in your case, I think there's only two, so we, at the moment, so getting one person to change might be feasible or doable, but we took this approach just to say that's one option that might work.
Yeah.
Without knowing.
Other options get rapidly much more expensive, right? Because here you'd be maximizing the conduit you're putting and all that, right? So
short-term solution is.
well, this would be long-term for this, but it would give you 20 charging stations
Yeah.
soon, right? That you could leverage, right? But again, this is an idea, it really depends on what the condo wants to do, right? So again, scale a project to maximize grants. So here we want to try to do something to try to do more infrastructure at the same time. So that you go get the $5,000 per charging station, okay? Avoiding a meter here, this is based on experience of a condo on Wellington. They put a bunch of charging stations, 27, I believe. And they did a survey and 27 people wanted to buy into the project. So it was about half of their residents. And what they ended up doing is they put a separate meter for the charging infrastructure, and they get $100 a month admin fee because it's a commercial. Anyway, so if you could avoid a meter because it's gonna.
It's also adding, if you meter every single spot, you add admin work, whether you like it or not. Now you need someone that's gonna go get those numbers, send a bill, invoice or whatever. So it's, if you can get a flat rate per charging station, number one, the condo can actually make a bit of money and have a reserve fund to improve the whole system. Number two, there's no headaches. You got a charger, you pay this much. It's fair for everyone, and honestly, it's very, very rare you'll have someone exceeding that number.
Yeah, I mean, you can easily spend more on administration than the actual electricity.
Well,
I was looking at like the charging stall in the last time it was 3,500. I could drive my car for 20 years for that amount of money. You know what I mean?
Yes,
Like,
but your gas saving is a lot more than that, right?
well, yeah, no, but
It'll
like
take a couple of years for you.
is that the cost is so low, like it doesn't, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
It's why you can't sort of just charge on the electricity that's being used and sort of like, double the price of the electricity to get the money back, because the 3,500, you'll never, like for landlords and stuff like that, I'm coming from the landlord world. Landlords just can't charge extra for the electricity because they'll never make that $3,500 back in selling electricity.
Yeah, so there's the different financials there. It's a different situation, but there's a couple of, so Sam touched on something a bit different than what I meant. So you don't want to have a meter for all the charging infrastructure if you could use an existing meter. Okay, that's metering your use anyways. And you don't want to have one meter per charging station, because that's going to cost you big bucks, not just in admin fees, but in installation fees. Okay, if you have to have separate meters, it becomes a nightmare. Okay?
But some of the chargers have built-in meters.
Yes. Okay, so so what we recommend is that they use the built-in functionality of the charging stations to, if they want to charge back the electricity, they would use that to figure out what to charge back, right? Okay. So, so financing, this is where, and we didn't talk about this so much when we did the presentation in your condo, but financing is, from what we're seeing right now, if you look at projects similar to yours, and there's another building, the one that we showed the building there, the initial costs that get going are significant. So you have to find some way to finance this, right? And so if you've got 20 charging stations, and Mitchell, I'll talk to you after about how we can make this different. But let's say you have 20 charging stations, so 20 people opt in, and so that gives you $100,000 max from the ZDIP program. Then you would have to match somehow, get $100,000 to match, okay? To be able to get the first $100,000, okay? But the basic infrastructure is, so we're not talking about that example we had for your condo where we're putting 20 charging stations in one common location. If you're putting 20 charging stations in different locations inside the 3 levels of the garage, you have to put transformers everywhere, conduit in a bunch of places. So what we've seen with another condo that we've been working with in Vanier is that the cost of doing the initial install, and I want to talk to Sam, see if there's other ways we could approach it to try to make it a bit easier, but we're talking more than $200,000 to get going, okay? So how are you going to finance that, right? So reserves, remember, can't use reserves, right? You may be able to leverage some maintenance, right? You may want to create a special reserve for this. Okay, so the condo and Vanier, they're talking about increasing the condo fees and using that, putting away into reserve, and then in a few years it was starting to implement the complete solution, right? And again, yeah, I already said that combined with other meetings. Okay, so that's really what we're talking about when we talk to the condos. And again, the objective is to allow people to charge as soon as possible with whatever they happen to have. The ideal situation is what we had on Baseline. We went to see a condo where they have enough 120 volt outlets to charge every car. We're not sure if the infrastructure would support it at the back end, but they have each plug. So there's a duplex outlet there. Each of the outlets has a 15 amp circuit. Okay. So you should be able to draw the 12 amps that would be drawn on every one of those plugs for every one of the cars. Again, we're not sure if there wouldn't be some issues downstream, right, with panels not supporting that and other things along the way not supporting that. But they've got enough so that they could start charging vehicles. You know, probably 30% of the vehicles they could charge without doing anything to their electrical infrastructure. Okay, that's a perfect situation. Okay, any questions? Yes.
Yeah, you were talking about designating buying the actual charger, but they might be, you might want to be able to or something like that. And at the same time, we're talking about increasing value of the condo. If the wiring is there, if the charger isn't there.
So the charging station, you're talking, $1,000 with tax, right?
So you can still advertise that your condo has charging.
But you can charge, you have the ability to charge.
So you would anyway, I suppose, yeah, you don't need the box, right?
You don't need the box, you need wiring or at least or some way of providing electricity at that stall, right? Okay, so that's the idea. Any other questions? No questions online? Yes.
Right, are you going to address when it's say, well, it's half the condo residents don't want to be paying the electricity charge and part of the other half that want the money.
Okay, so we handle it in two ways. One way is we tell them that so the question was about, what if people say, well, I don't want to pay for the electricity for this guy who's charging his car, for free, right? And stealing my electricity. So there's two ways to answer that. One of them is to talk about how cheap it is, right? So $2 per 100 kilometers is what we use as a rule of thumb. It's actually a bit higher than what you normally see in Ottawa, but it's pretty good, right? It makes it easy to calculate it anyways. The other thing is that if you want to be able to recover the cost of the electricity, then you would do like Lutz was alluding to, is you would use, once you've got level 2 charging stations, you would use a charging station to track how much electricity is used by each car and charge back based on that. Okay. So in the meantime, though, we're suggesting they have a flat fee, and because it's just easier. And for 120 volt, pretty hard to meter just that one plug. Okay.
Alan, that's a question.
Okay. Alan has a question. Alan?
Yeah, so one of the thoughts that I've also had around this was to have level 2s that are very low wattage, so like 2400 watt, 2.5 kilowatt, 3 kilowatt, and then have supplementary DC fast charger on site if you need high capacity because you're running a taxi or something, right? That way you're not going to fill up a taxi overnight that's gone a full battery depletion, but you still have, covering daily commutes and so on a relatively low wattage level 2, and you can still condition the battery and so on if that was the case. But that having a DC fast charger on site for the heavy users could be quite effective.
So we are actually not recommending any DC fast charging on site for a couple of reasons. One of them is if you look at a typical building, let's say a 350 kilowatt anyways, charger would soak up all the capacity to the grid just with that, right? So there's an issue with how much capacity you'd use. You wouldn't be able to deploy many of them, right? And the cost is very expensive for level 3. You also have to plug them with DC, right? So it's a really. It
doesn't necessarily have to be per building, but in the neighborhood, right? That you have a DC fast charger in the neighborhood.
Yeah. So the way I would handle that, if I was in a situation, in a condo and couldn't fully charge my car, let's say, or couldn't charge it fast, I would just go wherever I want to go and stop along the way, right? See what I mean? Like, it might be practical to have some, it might be practical to have DC fast chargers close to your house, right? But I'm not sure that's really a deal breaker, right? Because you could use a DC fast charger that's somewhere else, assumedly you're able to get 30, 40 kilometers or more to get a fast charger.
But then,
right?
that's fine, but then that, it still comes back to my point of using, 15 and 20 amp charging circuits, even less, 10 amp charging circuits at 240 instead of 30 and 40 amp circuits, because you don't need it, right?
Yeah,
You don't
so-
need
so-
it for daily commute.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. You don't need, a lot of people, they'll want to put 40 chargers and all that, and they don't need them, right? But what we want to do is we want to make sure we future-proof them, right? So we don't necessarily want to put something that won't work with V2G in the future. So there's a bit of a fine line there, right? So you might want to put the wires so they'll support something a bit bigger. And
So that one condo that you said already had 120 volt outlets to every spot, that's that's probably 12 gauge. It's at least 14 gauge. You could support 10 amp service, a 10 amp service at 240 on the same wires, right? You don't have to use 120 volt. You could switch those wires over to 240 and support level 2 at 10 amp.
yeah, without changing the wiring and without putting new conduits and all that, which would save a lot of costs, right? So actually, it's one of the things that Sam had talked about when we looked at that there'd be possibilities of doing other things, right? But if you think about it, there's many ways of skinning the cat, right? Right now, we're trying to get people to not lock themselves into a bad spot as much as possible. So we're not talking about large numbers of charging stations at this point, right? But you're absolutely right. I mean, 10 amp would be more than enough to for the vast majority of people, right?
The only other thing I wanted to mention was for high-end condos, typically people want to own a specific parking spot in the condo, and therefore they want to own their own equipment and own the whole shebang. So this becomes part of the investment and the part of the attraction of selling that condo later, right? Is that it's got dedicated charging at high rates or whatever for their
there's a couple of issues there, right? So if you allow one owner to have a dedicated circuit, and then what do you do with the second, third, fourth, and additional owners that at some point there'll be capacity constraints, right? So it's a bit of a tight line to walk, and these are things that condo boards have to consider. And your point about the parking spot, moving parking spots could be could be a very serious issue. People get really attached to having their parking spot close to the whatever they want to be close to, right? So it's not easy to change parking spots. So what we're anticipating is most people, what they'll want to do is they'll want to get charging at their existing parking spots. So we would deploy charging gradually and wiring and conduit and all that gradually across the floors as demand grows, right? So it's not it's not an easy thing to look at, right? There's so many things that to consider, right?
Raymond, I'm not an electrician. I just wonder if you've taken a look at elsewhere, like other localities around the world, if anybody's been able to solve this in a way that you can copy or take.
So we are copying.
That will say also Norway.
Yeah, so we are copying what they're doing in most cases. Now, the future proofing, I'm not sure that I've seen anybody that's looking at that part, right? But all the rest, I mean, having a charging management system and all that, these are things that we're seeing being deployed. There's actually a building here downtown. They put a charging station at every parking spot, okay, in one fell swoop. They put everything in here in Ottawa. Right, so there's different people, different condos doing different things, right? And yes, there are things happening in other places and we're trying to leverage what they're doing too. Any other questions? Okay, cool. So I should have a few more slides and I can take a break. So I mentioned earlier, when I talk about the agenda, we would talk about the ultra low overnight rates. So this is something that was mandated by the Ontario Energy Board about 6 months ago. Anyways, the last date that they could put it into effect was November 1st, I thought, but they're saying November 2nd. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's just one day, right? But the last day that they could put it into effect, essentially, Hydro One and Hydro Ottawa are putting it into effect. Okay, others had it back in May when the program started. But bottom line here is if you look at the rates, there's a big difference in rates, particularly between the on-peak. The on-peak is 28.6 cents a kilowatt hour. Okay. Now the corresponding part of that is, and these are the new rates as of November. Okay, so there's a big increase in electricity rates. For those who don't know, they're increasing electricity rates by about 20%. Okay, November 1st. I don't know why it's not the front page of the news, but they're increasing rates by about 20%. Anyways, the nighttime rate is 10 times smaller. Okay, there's a 10x between the 2.8 cent nighttime rate and the daytime rate of 28.6. Okay, so if you're charging your car at night, there's a darn good chance that this will work for you. But you need to think about the implications, right? And actually, I'll go through some specific examples with my bills a bit later. But bottom line is there's now 3 different levels. And if you have solar before, both Hydro One and Ottawa Hydro force you to be on tiered pricing. So tiered pricing, you pay a certain price for the first chunk of kilowatt hours you use, and then you pay a different price for above that. But it's the same price after that. There's no variation based on time of day or anything like that. So there is a time of use rate that's been there for a while. This is an addition to that, right? So if you look at the comparison, so this is in February, and these are real numbers. The numbers here are real numbers. I didn't double check to see if this was correct here, but it seems reasonable. So anyways, they're a calculator. So there's a calculator available on the OEB site. You link it from your account in Hydro One, or actually Hydro Ottawa. And you plug in the numbers here. And I took my February bill and plugged in the numbers I have. And this is what it's giving me. So if I wasn't tiered, that's where I would pay the most. I'd pay $404, $405 for that month. And being on time of use, I'm saving a bit. I'm saving what, $16, right? If I'm on ultra low overnight, I'm saving another $60-some, $65. Okay, so depending on your situation, and this is winter, okay? So you'll see other months are a bit different, but in winter, I'm gonna save $65 a month, according to the calculator. Now I'm gonna do things like move some other loads at night to try to get even more.
Right, does this calculation account for you moving, like responding to the price, or is this just based on your previous hourly usage you're projecting?
Based on the
So
current.
it'll be even better than this.
Yes,
Because that's what most people don't take into account. They've seen lots of people discussing the ULO rates, and a lot of people are put off by the high peak rate, but people understand, it's really easy to schedule your thermostat to not avoid running your air conditioner. And they're missing, there's a huge advantage here. A lot of people say, oh, I work from home, so I won't benefit from it. No, if you work from home, you will, because you're going to avoid the midday peak. On the regular time of use, you're getting the highest price in the middle of the day when you're most likely using the air conditioning and all your office stuff. ULO gives you a slightly lower rate between 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. 4 p.m. And then if you just make sure your AC doesn't run after 4, you're basically good because your stove actually doesn't use that much electricity. Most people don't realize that. According to Enercan, your stove only uses, I think it was like 2 kilowatt hours a day.
It uses lots for a very
short period of time. And your TV doesn't use that much, your phone, your laptop, those things don't really use that much electricity.
Yeah, so one thing that I didn't mention and you sort of brought up there is the rates here, the time of use, the peak times change between winter and summer. They reverse in the summer, like you said, it's the middays, it's the highest, it's on peak rate. Whereas in the winter, it's the two peaks, morning and evening, that are the peak rates. In the middle of the day is a bit cheaper, and at night is even cheaper, right? So anyway, so this is my numbers, okay? Ran this today with real numbers, and I'm gonna get a saving, okay? And again, I haven't changed my habits. Now, you know, I've been charging at night forever, so I don't charge my car during the day. There's things like that I already do, but this may push me to do to stretch myself a bit more, okay? So if you look at July, a very different profile in July, right? So here I have a saving, but a lot less, okay? About $16, $15 of savings. Okay, is what it's
That's
projected.
probably just because your AC is not tuned to respond to these price incentives, but if it was, you'd be saving more money.
Yes, yes, absolutely. But with my current consumption, I'd say $15. And like you say, I could do things a bit differently and save even more, okay? So, and you can see actually from time of use to tiered that it's about $50, 40 some dollars.
Another thing people don't necessarily take into account in these calculations is if you're currently on time of use and you have an EV, you might be scheduling your EV to start charging at 7 p.m. And then if you're using your hourly rates to project your costs under ULO, you're gonna overshoot because if you're charging at 7 p.m. under ULO, your usage is counting as peak rate. But
Yeah.
if you actually switch, you'd be charging at 11 o'clock instead, and you'd be spending way less on charging.
Yeah, so you, absolutely, there's things like that you could do now. For those of you who haven't heard it from me before, what I would recommend is you charge your car, if the car could do it, so it finishes charging in the morning at some time. In my case, it's set up to finish charging at 6 o'clock. Why? Because on Mondays and on Thursdays, I leave for hockey at 6 o'clock, so I want the car to be charged at that time. So if I've used more battery, it'll start charging earlier to make up for it, right? But the car will more or less start to charge randomly, right? So if everybody puts their car to start charging at 7 o'clock, we're gonna have a problem. And actually, they've seen some places where there's already a problem because the clocks are so precise that every Lincoln car out there is gonna start, you know, within a fraction of a second of them, and you'll see a peak. So I don't know if you guys heard before, that in the UK, they had a peak in the evening and they didn't know what the peak was. And what they figured out is there was a very popular TV show. When they would go to commercial, people would go and plug in their kettles to make tea.
Yeah.
And that would cause a spike on the. So you can imagine the charges could do a lot more than that, right? So in my case, it causes the car to start charging at a random time and finish charging at a random time because calculation is not always precise, right? So it usually finishes before 6 o'clock, okay? So anyways, this is July. I got another one just for comparison. So September, less differences of temperature. But I'm still seeing a slight saving, 16, 17 bucks. And not a huge saving, but again, I haven't adapted my practices to for the ultra low override rates, okay? So I hope that's gonna help you to see, at least get you interested in looking at it and see if it makes sense for you guys, okay? So Mike, your turn.
Terry has a question.
Terry has a question. Go ahead, Terry.
Yes, one thing that I have is a timer on my electric hot water heater, and I was doing it for the current period at 7 p.m. It would click on and heat it up. But now that I've applied for this new rate, I switched it over so it starts heating the water at 5 a.m. And I realized I had it wrong for the last 10 years, that having it at 5 a.m. means that that hot water in the tank is still hot at 7 p.m. when you turn on a dishwasher, say to get hot water for your hot dishwasher. Whereas before, when it was turning on at 7 p.m., the next period at say in the afternoon, the next day, it was starting to feel a little bit cooler than it could have been. So the advantage is, if you have a timer, is put it on so it comes on before the end of the peak period, and you'll have hot water for most of the day if you're a relatively easy user on hot water.
Yeah, so that's a good point for hot water heaters. You could use a separate timer. In my case, I've got a heat pump, hot water heater, and I could schedule different temperatures at different times. So what I'm trying to do is heat the water mostly at night. The other thing that I do with the dishwasher, we time it so it starts washing the dishes in the middle of the night, right? So that way we're using low rates. One thing to note is if the water isn't hot enough for the dishwasher should have a heating element that will heat the water for you if you want to wash with hot water, okay? But yeah, so one of the things that happens if you think about it, you wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning, you take a shower, and that's when the water in the tank gets colder. So that's when it'll draw power to heat the water, right? So that contributes to the morning peak, okay? So moving that to some other time of the day is good for, well, for everybody, right? Okay. Mike, any other questions before?
No, I
Okay,
think we're
Mike?
good. Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay.
So news. We'll start off the news with the International Energy Agency. It's the body that keeps mispredicting EV adoption because they keep insisting on a linear adoption rate. But anyway, they came out with a new report. It's the World Energy Outlook. It's something they do every year. And this year, they are actually predicting that they're saying that we are on track to see fossil fuels peak before 2030. And this is the International Energy Agency, who's notoriously pessimistic about EV adoption and clean energy and all that. So this is the first time ever that they have predicted that global emissions will peak. And they say the mid 2020s is when they're projecting the peak, and that fossil fuel use will peak by the 2030. They noted in their report that in 2020, 1 in 25 cars sold globally were electric, and now in 2023 it's 1 in 5, which is a huge increase. They're also projecting that the global share of renewable energy will reach 50% by 2030 at the expense of, as you can see on the chart there. Actually, no, that chart is something else. But at the expense of basically gas, coal, oil. Now, they still call it natural gas because the gas industry has been very good at greenwashing us for 100 years. So I put in fossil there for you just to make sure that everyone understands that it's a fossil fuel. But they say that the momentum behind clean energy is now sufficient, that there's no turning back. It's going to happen before 2030. Now they have a bunch of scenarios. The one that they call steps is like the baseline scenario. It's like the one where it's basically stated policy. So it's whatever has been enacted so far. If it were to just continue forward, that's the steps policy or the steps scenario that they're talking about. So we have that on that chart on the right there. You'll see the pre-Paris baseline. There's some efficiency gains and stuff. Electric vehicles take a chunk. Wind takes a chunk. Solar PV takes a chunk. And that gets us down to a bending of the curve downward, and that's gigatons of CO2 per year. And you can see that bend happening. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Next
So,
slide.
sorry, just a comment before you go to the next slide. So if you think about what Mike just said, the IEA tends to understate the rate of change, okay?
Yeah.
So they understate the adoption of EVs. They understate the adoption of solar. They understate the adoption of wind. So if you combine all of that together, my feeling is the numbers they have there on this graph, they're way too pessimistic. We're going to see a much sharper decline over the next couple of years.
Yeah,
Okay?
I mean, they have a track record of being very pessimistic with their projections for clean energy stuff. So if IEA is saying this, then you can pretty much take it to the bank at this point.
I saw a
All right,
graph,
next slide.
20 years in a row, the IEA was mispredicting coal decline. And
Yes.
every single year they would make a new line that went straight, and it's literally like they had amnesia. Like, it's incredible. It's actually
Yep.
completely insane. So
Yeah, we've talked about
they're
it
even
before.
saying this,
Yeah.
it's gonna peak in like 2 years or something, not 2030.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
predicting long-term is very hard, right? And there are systematic reasons why they understate the pace of change. A lot of it has to do with people who, and the oil interests that are trying to keep them from portraying a true rosy future, right? But a small change 1 year, after 10 years becomes much bigger, right? So it's very hard to predict. But they're, obviously they're under predicting. So Mike?
Yeah, and I downloaded the PDF, so if anybody wants that PDF, you can read it. I can send it to you. It is a peer-reviewed document, so it's over 100 pages long. I didn't read the whole thing, of course, because I didn't have time, but the executive summary is very interesting as well. And you can go download that on the website as well. So next story is Metrolinx. Metrolinx is the provincial transit agency, sort of run by the Ontario government. And they're the people behind the Go Transit and our fabulous Presto cards that always seem to not work properly. Anyway, they have entered a joint procurement contract with a bunch of smaller transit agencies. So Ottawa, as you might know, has partnered with TTC, right? TTC is enormous, and Ottawa is attaching ourselves to them to acquire a bunch of electric buses. But cities like Barrie, Belleville, Brantford, Kingston, Leamington, Milton, Sault Ste. Marie, Stratford, Sudbury, Thunder Bay are all covered under this Metrolinx contract, so they can do a bulk buy of electric buses as well to try and shave off some of the capital costs. So they are ordering 40 new electric buses over the next couple of years for all of these little cities. It also covers the charging systems for those buses. OC Transpo have been following the transit committee meetings. They didn't get the documents, the RFP documents from TTC until August. So they have been trying to go through those to see what our buses will be. And they expect to, in January, at the January meeting, to talk about the electric buses that Ottawa will be getting. We're supposed to be getting 26 next year, and then something like 78 the following year. And the breakdown will be between Nova Bus and New Flyer, and we'll find details on that in January. So progress there. Next slide, please. All right. So the government of Ontario, or actually no, this is the federal government, they have partnered with Hypercharge to install 48 level 2 chargers. It's a North Vancouver-based company. They're getting $250,000 almost from the federal government. There'll be 11 parking lots in Southern Ontario and operational by the end of next year. So if you're going down to Southern Ontario, you can now look at Hypercharge. Look for those chargers. Apparently they also have fast chargers, so there you go. Next slide, please. Ontario is now, the government of Ontario, so going from federal to provincial, they are building more charge on, or IV chargers, I guess, under the Charge On program. They'll be spending $91 million to build thousands of chargers in highway rest areas, carpool lots, tourist destinations like Ontario provincial parks. They are also looking for applications for community sites. And people, if you are looking for to host a charging site, you have until the 31st of January to submit your application. They want to have publicly accessible charging sites in communities with less than 170,000 people. So we're talking more rural to sort of fill that gap. And interestingly, they say there are 135,000 EVs on Ontario roads as of September, and they expect 1 million EVs on the road by 2030. And Mitchell, you have a question or comment?
I guess it's more of a comment. The requirements for the Charge On program are not specifically IV chargers. They're just chargers that comply with OCPP.
Right.
So, I mean, IV's got a leg up because they obviously do.
Yeah.
And the other part of it being that the only municipalities that can't apply for this funding are Ottawa, Toronto, and the surrounding Kiel region, King County, sort of around the Toronto horseshoe. But otherwise, basically every other county and municipality could apply for this kind of funding.
Yeah, cool. All right, so
Mitchell, I'm thinking like the conservation authorities, like if you have parks, like conservation authority parks and things like that, like Milliken Tail, it's just coming in my head. Would the conservation authorities be able to apply for some of these parks?
Conservation authorities conservation authorities can apply, except the rating criteria for how they evaluate submissions is based on sort of the surrounding amenities, of which conservation authorities aren't necessarily near many of the amenities people would be looking for. So if there is a conservation authority, I'm thinking of urban ones, potentially in Scarborough, like the Rouge Parkway. That one might be good, but your average conservation authority that operates sort of outside of major urban areas is likely not going to be as competitive as some of the more urban suburban locations.
Yeah, the focus seems to be on so the IV ones will probably end up on Ontario owned areas like the highway rest spots and Ontario provincial parks and stuff. But they also want tourist destinations, so think like the Big Apple down on the 401, stuff like that. Places where people would need charging on the go, sort of in transit between major centers. But yeah, pretty cool.
I mean, their like on route stuff is already well established. I don't think
Yeah.
they're going to be looking at those. I think they were looking potentially at carpool lots, which I think is a terrible idea.
I agree.
And the other sort of, I think, winning bid is going to be for municipalities that have, say, downtown parking lots that are near many things. So one of which is actually Cobourg. Cobourg's center parking lot is right next to a grocery store and the center of Cobourg. And then Port Hope is somewhat similar to that. They seem to operate many of their urban or municipal parking lots close to a lot of, say, downtown attractions or near places where tourists would want to visit as a stopover as they're driving through. So,
yeah. Alan, did you have something to say?
I was just wondering if any of these programs of the two governments are starting to mandate minimum charge rates.
They, on this one specifically, they don't.
Some of them have been like 25 kilowatt and just haven't been very appropriate. So
yeah, this one's the same kind of way. They're giving you money for whatever chargers you want to put in, not necessarily chargers that are going to be the most used. The only other benefit of this program versus ZVIP is that municipalities get 75% funding coverage versus all other private businesses get 50% project coverage. So, yeah.
And it's not necessarily that the municipality or the venue wants to, people only stay for 15 minutes. They want them to stay for 2 hours or 3 hours. Right?
So the way I understand it is like a municipality could apply on behalf of a business or generally a business improvement area more likely. And therefore that is usually going to be more the eligibility for that is the same. And the other merit criteria they're looking at is going to be partnerships between private industry or municipal governments. So the more people you can bring into this kind of thing is likely going to result in better applications. And I feel if you have multiple stakeholders, you can design sort of your charging locations and your charging options for a variety of different people based on what it is that you're trying to attract, whether it's people to visit downtown and therefore spend time there, and then that's level 2, or if you're looking for sort of establishing your community as a destination on the way to something else, which is, I think, how most of Quebec's charters are actually designed, at least from driving that route and going through Quebec. There's a lot of towns that you never hear about, except for the fact that they have really good charging experiences.
Yeah. All right.
Sorry, Mike. Mitchell, do you know if you could stack the federal funds with this?
I believe you can stack provincial funding with this. It does acquire, there's a specific mention of stacking funding up to 90%. I'm unclear whether or not that's provincial funding on top of this or if it's also including federal funding. But I mean, if you get federal funding, you already have to have matched funding for that. So it's not necessarily the same kind of thing versus provincial funding. You could have a provincial government that's sponsoring, say, tourism activities in your community, and therefore you're also applying for funding for this that you're already going to be spending for tourism activities to put in charging infrastructure.
Yeah, so what I meant is the federal government will pay half the cost, I believe, or up to half the cost. I was wondering if the Ontario government's program would pay for another 25 or more %, right? Sure.
Not in this case, because you're like the funding on this is up to 75% of project costs. So if you're already getting 50% of it covered by like a federal program, then you're only actually asking for 25%. It's not, I guess it's helpful to get more money, but you're not getting the full benefit of this program that way. And I think those charges would have been installed anyways. So I don't think it would make a better application that way.
Yep. Cool.
Okay. So Northvolt has chosen Quebec for a new battery plant for EVs. It'll be called Northvolt 6. It'll be at Saint-Basile-le-Grand and McMasterville, Quebec. It'll be the size of 318 football fields. This was from an American news site because Americans refuse to use metric. And is expected to produce 60 gigawatt hours per year, roughly enough batteries for 1 million EVs per year. First phase will begin construction any day now, with the first batteries expected to be produced in 2026, and it'll employ 3,000 people. So that's in Battery Valley, by the way, in Quebec. So there's a big area of Quebec that is starting to make waves in the EV industry. So that's cool. Next slide, please. And keeping on the battery factory front, and I promised this earlier, so here we're talking about it. Hyundai has announced that they are 99.9% complete of their foundation work for their new factory in the US. This factory is way ahead of schedule because of the IRA Act that the US passed. They bumped up their plans significantly. So it's been 1 year of construction, and they're already basically complete the foundation. 81% of the steel framing is up, and they've started working on the roof and walls, as you can see in the picture. They expect mass production to begin of Ioniq vehicles in early 2025, which is many months sooner than they originally had planned when they announced the factory in the first place. And this is all so that their cars can become eligible for the US rebates and to increase capacity of production, right? Next slide, please. Sticking with Hyundai, Ioniq 5 will be switching to NACS in Canada in early 2025, late next year for the US vehicles. So if you're ordering an Ioniq 5 and you're not expecting it to get here until the year after next, which could be a lot of people actually, then your car will probably have NACS native to the car. Hyundai vehicles with CCS like mine will be able to use the superchargers around the same time. And Kia and Genesis are also they've also announced that they'll be switching to NACS in the same time frame. It's an EGMP thing. So that platform is now going to be NACS as of 2025, like basically everybody else. Next slide, please. And in Kia's case, the EV5, this is what the EV5 looks like. It's the smaller sibling to the EV9, and it is a Canada exclusive for North America. So apparently the Americans do not like small SUVs for whatever reason. So only Canada will be getting the EV5. It's an EGMP-based vehicle with up to 720 kilometers of range, depending on the spec. But that hasn't been confirmed yet for Canada.
That's CLTC range, by the way.
Oh, okay. So yeah,
That's
so
why
it'll be
it's so
less than
high.
that. I would expect around 500 to 600 at most as a reasonable range.
Oddly, the EV5's on a 400 volt architecture. I don't
Yeah,
know
that's probably a
why.
cost thing as well, right? But yeah, so there you go, EV5. So if you're in the market for a cyberpunk looking small SUV, there you go.
The
With vehicle to
speculation I
load.
saw was that it's not coming to the US because of the tax rebates, because it won't be eligible. So that's why.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, I guess given the market segment that it's going to be put into, it's supposed to be more affordable, like on the affordable end. So if it's not eligible for that rebate, then I guess it wouldn't make sense to send it to the US. Whereas in Canada, like the rebate applies to everybody, kind of thing. So
It's not exactly a micro car. Like it.
yeah, no, it's
Takes
fair.
a bite.
Yeah, they're doing what they do. I don't know. Anyway, we're getting it first, and for now, we're the only ones getting it, so that's cool. So yeah, Honda has provided more details about its Prologue. It'll be its first EV sold in North America. We did not get the cool little Honda, I forget what it was called, the little hatchback thing they sold in Europe for a bit. So this will be our first EV in Canada and the US from Honda. It'll be a front wheel or all-wheel drive vehicle starting next year for sale. They haven't announced pricing or much about it, other than that it'll be built on the Ultium platform. It'll have an 85 kilowatt hour battery pack. It's expected to start around 50,000 Canadian, which will put it into competition with the ID4 and Ioniq 5. Unlike the GM vehicles that are on the same platform, however, it'll have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. So if you're looking at a Blazer and actually want CarPlay or Android Auto, then this might be a good option for you because it's basically a Blazer. Sticking with Honda and GM, they're ending their joint venture to develop low-cost EVs on the Ultium platform. So they've had a falling out, and they were supposed to start production of a bunch of vehicles in 2027 on the Ultium platform, but they are citing a changing business environment. And both have confirmed that the project is now dead, and they aren't certain they could reach 14 billions in profit that they were targeting. They're blaming the workers instead of the overpaid executives who contribute nothing to the car. But anyway, enough of that. GM is also pushing back the Equinox, Silverado, Sierra, and Ultium Bolt. So they released their Q3 earnings, and then they delayed a bunch of vehicles in order to protect pricing. They're making production adjustments that will make the vehicles less expensive to produce, is what they're saying. No real specifics were mentioned other than it'll be a few months of delay. When we get into the Bolt, you might figure out why they're delaying a little bit. And I think that is the next slide.
Yeah, so Mike, I think that's management speak that they have there. I think if you think about it, there's a lot of pent up demand for the Equinox, the Blazer, and the Silverado. So the faster they bring it out, the faster they're going to sell them, right?
Yeah.
So why aren't they doing that? It's probably because they're still having problems ramping Ultium battery production.
They are definitely having problems ramping Ultium, but there's also another twist in the story, and it's LFP batteries. And the Bolt, I'll get into the next story with the Bolt there, but yeah, the Bolt will be the first EV with LFP, which will help drive down those costs. So they might be delaying production of the others to get that LFP stuff going so that they can have higher margins on the other vehicles as well. But yeah, Mitchell, you had a question or comment?
Saw an article that might have come out after you'd made this slide, but that $30,000 Equinox is not going to be a thing.
That's right.
$5,000 Equinox.
Yeah, they're dropping the base model. It's going to be the 2LT now. Yeah.
Yeah, so they're doing the same thing they did with basically every other product they've released to date.
Yes.
And it's not looking like a very I posted this about the Blazer, and I think it's still true about the Equinox in the sense that if you want a cheap car, I don't think they're going to be making cheap cars for you anytime soon.
Yeah.
So you might as well just look at what's available today instead of hoping that something in the future might become cheap for you.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of what they're doing, right? They'll come out and announce a car and give you a really compelling price point, and then they pull the rug from under you and hope you buy the more expensive version, right? It's sketchy tactics. Alan.
Well, I guess they're switching to LFP, which means their ranges will be lower because it's not as energy dense as the other.
Yeah.
Good, but that'll help.
The Equinox is getting a longer range than they expected, though. That instead of the 280-mile range, it's now apparently 320 miles. But if I'm paying an extra $5,000 US for it, it's like an $8,000 difference here in Canada, and that's $8,000
Equinox doesn't have LFP yet, right? So
they are putting LFP in it, as far as I know.
No, not yet. Apparently, the Bolt EUV or the Bolt on Ultium will be the first LFP car.
Right. So if that helps bring their costs down, but also reduces the range a little bit, then it's trying to find that
middle ground,
right?
Yeah.
That middle ground, trying to hit the middle ground.
So Alan, you're assuming there that they would keep the same weight of battery, right? But they could put more weight of battery and get the same amount of electricity, right?
Yeah, I mean, and this might
Yeah,
be
but
what they're
volume.
talking about, right? They might be switching to LFP and then re-optimizing the vehicle so that they get the same range they were getting with NCM, but on a different, chemistry. So that might be why they delayed.
There's not a lot of extra volume available in the Bolt for Vroom, so I don't know how they would increase the volume of battery for the extra weight that you're talking about. There's space, so they're gonna do what they do with that space.
Yeah, I mean, they're redesigning this car, right, for the new
Yeah, it's gonna be
version?
on a new platform.
So-
Alan, right?
Yeah,
No, I
so-
get
It's a new
it,
car.
but it's already a small car, so.
Yeah, well, they might increase it by a few percent to make the room that they need for the LFP, right? Just to get the same range. We don't know, and that's the point, right? So, anyway, either way, they're delayed. So, yeah, don't hold your breath for your Chevys. Toyota, long opponent of EVs, is now showing off EV concepts, and they actually look pretty cool. So they've got the Land Cruiser SE concept, which is a three-row ginormous SUV that will seat 7, and the EPU, which I guess is electric pickup concept. It's a Maverick-sized small battery electric 5-seat pickup truck with a mid-gate thing so that you can have an 8-foot bed or whatever if you wanted to. So that's pretty cool, but that's literally the only details they provided. I hope they make them. I think these would be very compelling vehicles if they did. So we'll see, watch this space, I guess. Hopefully they come to production.
So Mike,
Next.
you haven't, you don't have it in a deck there, but my understanding is Toyota today announced that they're dropping hydrogen for their small vehicles, for light duty vehicles.
What? Really?
Yeah,
Oh
We were
my.
looking at that earlier, Craig and I.
Toyota.
I put it in the chat, the very top there, the very first thing in the chat is a link to the article. But essentially Toyota, they say they haven't officially completely thrown in the towel, but they've said that they realize that because there's no infrastructure for hydrogen, they're really never going to be able to sell any vehicles because they're never going to have any infrastructure. So the only places where they can really look at infrastructure, put in infrastructure is in the sort of trucking industry, where you only need sort of two places, sort of where you're going and where you're coming
It
from.
only took them 20 years to figure that one out. Wow, good for them.
Wow, I know, like, this is shocking. We haven't been saying that for 20 years at all. No.
I know. Okay, Mitchell, did you have a comment?
No, maybe it's just on the hydrogen thing, but I guess the city of Edmonton must be thrilled about that fact because they just spent a ton of money to buy 100 Toyota hydrogen taxis for whatever. So yeah, that's great news.
Well, I'm sure the oil industry will pay for it, right? They got lots of money. Anyway, next slide, please.
It doesn't even make sense.
I've themed the news, so we're sticking with themes, as you can see. So they made a move to acquire a real battery that actually exists in real life instead of their mythical solid state batteries that they magically somehow invented without anybody realizing, with having no battery research department or anything at all in the company. So they've signed a contract with LG to actually get real batteries that exist. Their goal is optimistic to produce 3.5 million EVs annually by 2030. So they have 6 years to go from basically nothing to 3.5 million EVs. So good luck with that, Toyota. LG will be supplying Toyota from the Michigan facility that they're expanding. They're building a whole new factory just for Toyota to supply Toyota's Kentucky manufacturing facility with NCMA batteries, which is a conventional battery that we all know and love in our EVs. Did I hear a comment or something?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, considering Tesla worldwide is going to be close to 2 million by the end of this year, like they'll almost certainly be more than 2 million next year.
So Toyota sells about 10 million cars a year, right? So this would be about 35% of their production. That's in.
Assuming they still are able to sell 10 million vehicles in 2030. I would argue that by 2030, they're not going to be able to sell 10 million vehicles. So,
We'll see. I mean, either way, going from nothing to 3.5 million vehicles in 6 years. I mean, it's taken Tesla over 15 years to get anywhere even within shouting distance of that, right?
Right.
So we'll see.
Well,
It's
then,
all about the batteries.
Yeah, given that they're deciding now to use LG batteries, they can't be that far along in the engineering for the car, right?
Well, no kidding. They can't be that far along in their mythical solid state batteries. That they're telling
I think
everyone to
it's,
wait, don't buy an EV yet. We have solid state coming, just, in the future. With our
Yeah, we should
self-charging
get, we
hybrids.
should get one thing straight about solid state batteries. They're not a specific chemistry. It just means that the electrolyte is solid.
Yes,
It's
yes,
basically just a buzzword. Like you can have different cathodes and anode materials that increase battery density. You can
Yeah.
have, the new technologies for regular, liquid lithium batteries that make them a lot more energy dense. And we every year get a couple % better, just like we did with other technologies. But yeah, I mean, like Toyota is an interesting topic. They're only ramping up to have 35% of their cars be electric by 2030. But we know that the adoption curve is exponential, and
Mhm.
they might end up in a death spiral because we know they're going to go down, and then investors aren't going to invest in them, so they're not going to be able to save themselves from their own bad foresight because they're not going to be able to ramp without investment, and then they're just going to go into death spiral.
And they have
Yep.
huge debt, right? They have over
Yep.
$200 billion in debt. Over
So-
$200 billion in debt.
And that's actually why adoption curves are exponential, because as interest grows in the new industry, investment grows in it, but the investment also leaves the old industry, which makes the old industry go into a death spiral. And
Yep.
so both forces happen at the same time, converge, and you get an exponential curve.
That's right. So anyway, good luck, Toyota. It's been nice knowing you. They are going to switch to NACS though, starting in 2025. So if you are in line waiting for a BIS Forks, then if you're going to get yours in 2025, it'll have NACS and you'll be able to use a supercharger very slowly, but you'll still be able to use a supercharger, and all the Tesla people get mad at you for blocking the charging spots. Adapters will be, offered in 2025 like everyone else. So there, add another one to the list. Next slide, please. And yeah, we snuck into the Tesla corner here. So BMW is also on Team NACS again, 2025. Same, you guys know the drill. And then I think my next slide has the last few EVs. There we go. So this is my favorite. Oh, what happened to all my little boxes there, Raymond? They were all perfect. And then anyway, whatever.
Sorry.
You messed up my slide. It looked gorgeous and I spent so much time and now it's ugly. So anyway, basically all the ones on the left, all of those brands are Team NACS. And then the only leftovers are basically VW and Stellantis with a few stragglers like Mazda, who may not even survive. So, but yeah, so that's how that's going. It looked a lot better when I sent it to Raymond before he ruined it. Cybertruck deliveries to select customers starting in November. I won't dwell too long on this. I'm sure everyone who follows Tesla has heard all the doom and gloom about it. But basically they plan on delivering around 200 vehicles this year to people. They apparently have a 2 million order backlog, so that'll be going well. They first announced a truck in 2019, as we all remember. Deliveries were supposed to start in 2021. During the Q3 earnings call, Musk said that they may have dug their own grave with the Cybertruck. So that's confidence inspiring. They also initially,
Sorry, didn't he say the same thing with the Model X and the doors?
no, he said those were Fabergé eggs, and he was right. They were very prone to breaking a lot. So
Yeah, but he sort of repeated the same mistake, right? By doing something drastically different that's just slowing them down.
yeah, it's almost like he's a crazy man-child who can't learn from mistakes. So they were planning on selling the vehicle for $39,900 US. However, more recent reports from people who are waiting in line for such a truck are that they're hearing it's closer to $100,000, which is very far from the original price that was initially put on their website. Final pricing has yet to be announced, despite delivery starting literally in the next few weeks. So watch this space. And they recently shot the truck with a Tommy gun. And so if you want a bulletproof truck, because you live in a dystopia, then well, there you go. $100,000 since yours. Probably, maybe. That's it. I'm done. I think that's it.
And yeah, any questions for Mike?
Was there anything about, I think Hyundai announced that they have an average sized truck in the works?
Maybe. I don't pay attention to Tesla rumors.
No,
Like
it's
that
not
because-
Tesla.
Hyundai.
Hyundai.
Oh, Hyundai.
Yeah.
Yeah, they haven't. They've talked about it. They haven't really given any details, so I haven't. It's not in the news because it's not real yet. But hopefully, yeah, it'll be nice if they do. There's demand for that kind of truck.
Any other comments, questions? Moving on. Okay, cool. So, so we'll do a brief EVX update, since we're finished all our activities essentially for EVX. This is a picture from last year, so we haven't wrapped it because actually the tarp did a bit of damage on the wrap, so we're not gonna put the tarp this year. But we have it stored away already. So if you look at the results for the year, so test drive event, we had 6. We had events with booths, 8 events with booths. We did 2 presentations. That's the ones we did for the city, I believe. We've done some others, but those are the ones that are counting for AVX. 336 test drives. So the event on the 23rd of September, we had 101 test drives just on that one day. So pretty happy about that event. Test rides 199, e-bikes 160. I'll let you read the rest. So so pretty good numbers. And we'll see what we do next year. So we're, as we've said before, I guess we said it before, we've actually requested some money from NRCam for the next 2 years. So we'll see what happens. They haven't said no yet. But we don't know, right? Whether they're gonna accept our proposal or not. So yeah, so we'll have more to say on that when they tell us no, or we start talking to them about the details of signing a contract. Okay. Okay, so that's it for EVX for now. Past events. So Finland and Coffee, we had 5 events because we have one in September here. And anyways, so 5 events, a busy month for that because we haven't been doing any other activities, right? So we're doing it essentially almost every Saturday. One thing that happened last month is the TC Expo that I participated in with Jorge. Very interesting event because there were a lot of drones and a lot of a lot of military applications of different flying stuff. So very interesting day. They had really cool stuff to see. But we were showing Jorge's solution for charging, right? So other thing we did, this was very small. So Just Foods is where we store the trailer. And they asked us to go to an event that they had. So we were there with a few people. And it wasn't a very busy event, right? So, but anyways, they asked us to go, and we'll see next year. We might not attend. We'll see. Okay. Upcoming events, not that much. So we have the next meeting here. Kilowatts and Coffee. So we have some every Saturday except Remembrance Day. November 11th is a Saturday this year. So we'll keep on doing that over the winter. The other thing is we're going to have a volunteer appreciation event. This is for people who participated in the EVX activities. Okay, so not everybody's received an invitation. If you think you should have got one and you didn't get one, let me know. But these are for people who participated in several activities along this year, right? So,
and it does not involve skydiving, so there will be no skydiving.
Yeah, the idea was to show teamwork there, not necessarily skydiving, but anyways, so the meal will be provided and beverages will be at your discretion for those who will be joining us, okay? So that should be fun. And that's about it. So if you're not a member, we encourage you to sign up for membership. And I think the last thing we have is our YouTube channel. So Mike has been putting stuff on the YouTube channel. We're now at 78 subscribers.
Yeah. Yeah, somebody asked in the chat, so I haven't been posting lately because I was flooded in August and I've been spending up until now rebuilding my house. So I've just gotten my home office back up and running, so I hope to start working on those videos and getting them posted soon. So we are now 3 behind.
4 with tonight, right?
3 with tonight, so September, October.
July.
Oh, August. No,
September.
July is up there, isn't it?
No,
Okay,
it's
well,
June.
I'll work on that.
Could be an old.
I think this is an old picture for sure. So July may be there, I'm not sure.
Anyway, I'll put them up.
That's it. So I guess, we'll turn off the recording for now. And, Mike, do you want to say your spiel for the end of the recording?
Sure. So if you're watching us live, then stick around for the roundtable. And if you are watching us after the meeting on YouTube, thanks for watching, and we will talk to you next month.